Check, sound check. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live and I'll be calling the meeting to order. We're just waiting on quorum. So if you can just wait patiently, we would really appreciate it. Thank you. I sent the councillor a text message to see if, oh, there she is. Okay, thank you. She's getting herself logged in there, she's saying. Okay. Okay, Councillor Pauls, can you hear me?
Thank you. I was just on a call with staff, so I just finished it. So thank you for waiting a couple of minutes for me. I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you for attending today. Yeah. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may be audibly or visually recording this meeting. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can submit another request if they so desire. I will be timing your questions and not the answers, just to make sure that you have all the appropriate time that you need. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there are several changes to the agenda. We have several communications items. Item 5.1, removal of Sir John A. Macdonald statue. We have several communications items under that topic from Lisa Marie Johnston, Sarah Brown, Marisabel Gabriel, Matthew Ing, Pascali Marchand, Laura Ha, Caitlin Pulch, Destiny Pitters, Christine Hudspeth, Kurt Dunn and Briar Hopley. We also, Hopley. We also have correspondence from Joshua Warish regarding respecting reinstallation of the Sir John A. Macdonald statue. The recommendation for all of these items are that they be received and referred to the consideration of item 8.1. We have 2 new delegation requests under item 6. 6.2 from Miguel Avila Velarde from Toronto Cop Watch, respecting the proposal to re-erect a statue of genocide again in Hamilton. And then we have a delegation request from Lyndon George, that's item 6.3. Lyndon George from the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, respecting landmarks and monuments review. Both of those delegation requests are for today's meeting. And these delegations will be heard with item 8.1 immediately following the presentation. And we also have item 9.1, delegation from Frederick Dryden from Liberty for Youth, respecting programming that will support the at-risk youth of Hamilton and surrounding areas to overcome and succeed in this challenging environment. This delegation request was approved on March 24th, 2022. The delegate has withdrawn his delegation for today. And although not a change to the agenda, a revised version of report HSC 21025A, PED 21149A, and PW 21038A, respecting landmarks and monuments review, was published to the agenda as a revised report, and members are reminded to be sure they have the latest version when we get to that item.
Thank you very much. Clerk, may I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Paul, seconded by Councillor Marula. Any discussion on the agenda as amended? Seeing none, we'll have the vote, please. Thumbs up from Councillor Pauls. And that vote carried 4-0. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this afternoon? Seeing none, we will move on to item 4.1, the approval of the minutes. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of April 21st, 2022? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Marula. Any discussion about the minutes? Seeing none, we'll have the vote, please. Thank you. The vote's up. And that vote carries also. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive communications items 5.1 A to K and 5.2, and to refer them to the consideration of item 8.1, landmarks and monuments review? Moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Any discussion about any of the communication items? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, we will have the vote, please. The vote is up. Thank you. And that vote carried. We have delegation requests 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the delegations requests as presented? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Pauls. So this is to approve the delegation requests. Any comments or questions about the delegation request? Seeing none, we can have the vote, please. Thank you. And that item carries 4-0. We're now moving on to item 7 on your agenda, which is 7.1, the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer LGBTQ Advisory Committee minutes. 7.1A is December 21st, 2021. 7.1B is January 18th, 2022. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive the minutes of the LGBTQ Advisory Committee? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Any questions about those minutes? Seeing none, we'll have the vote, Madam Clerk. Thank you. Okay, so I've got now, unless I've gone too fast, are we on 8.1 then? And so we're going to hear from staff first and then hear from the delegates. Is that what your intention is? Perfect. Thank you. So item point, my apologies, I'm just making sure that I'm following the rules here. 8.1 is landmarks and monuments review. I'd like to call upon Angie Burden, General Manager of the Healthy and Safe Communities, to introduce this item, and to introduce Shelley Hill, the Manager of Indigenous Relations, and Melissa Hamill, First Peoples Group, who will give the presentation. Angie, Shelley, Melissa, please turn on your cameras and microphones. And Angie, you can start.
Thank you to the Chair. Angie Burden, General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities. Through you to the committee. I want to start by acknowledging that today is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, a day for us to honor and remember the lives of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in our community. In recognition of the day, and as we continue to bring awareness and recognize how this impacts our community at a local level, the Indigenous Relations team has installed an Honoring Our Sisters red dress exhibit in the lobby of Theatre Aquarius, which can be viewed by the community until May 7th. Last summer, City Council approved moving forward with a historical review of city-owned landmarks and monuments to determine how we can honor and acknowledge Indigenous history and contributions. The report that is being brought forward today provides an update on what we've heard so far and outlines our next steps. It was important that we heard first from the Indigenous community to understand areas of significance, identify which landmarks were highest priority, and develop a framework for how we can engage the Indigenous community going forward. First and foremost, we heard about the importance of building long-term relationships built on mutual trust and respect, and we recognize that this will take time and that we are all on a learning journey. The presentation today from Shelley Hill, Manager of Indigenous Relations, and Melissa Hamill from First Peoples Group outlines a framework for moving forward and next steps. We are committed to further consultation and broadening this next phase of consultation to hear from all members of our community, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as well as continuing to engage with the Indigenous community to find ways to reflect the fuller truth into historical narratives. We are also committed to undertaking a complementary education campaign to help the general public understand why amplifying Indigenous voices is so important. And before I turn it over to Shelley and Melissa, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that up until this point of the engagement with our circle of experts, we have heard many ideas, recommendations, suggestions, and you can find those in Appendix A in a 40-page report that Melissa has offered and we're about to hear more about. In order to ensure that we are all on the same page about which recommendations of all of those ideas and suggestions that have been contained in the report, I did revise the staff report earlier in the week to draw attention to the summary of recommendations, which is found at the beginning of the 40-page report, which is page 5 and 6. And with your indulgence, I'll just read them here. That the recommendations in the Honoring Our Roots, Creating Space for Indigenous Voices report by First Peoples Group be endorsed as supplementary to the Urban Indigenous strategy and used to guide the next phase of work and review. And there are 5 recommendations on those first 2 pages of that report. Continue to foster long-term relationships with local First Nations and in urban Indigenous communities that are based on mutual trust and respect. Create and action a communication plan that includes interpretive signage at the high priority sites that indicates the city is aware that these sites are problematic and educates the public about the need for further consultation and action. Prioritize the building of Indigenous community gathering spaces, both indoors and outdoors. Hire an Indigenous curatorial team composed of a curator. And the last one, hire an Indigenous community liaison to lead engagement with local First Nations and the urban Indigenous community in Hamilton. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Melissa to the committee meeting today, and also Shelley. And Shelley, I'll turn it over to you to lead us through the staff presentation. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Thank you. Thank you, Angie. And through the chair, I'm going to share a presentation as we get started.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Scano, Sego, Ani, hello. Before we begin, I also would like to acknowledge today, May 5th, as the National Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls LGBTQ2S+. Good afternoon, Chair and committee, members of committee. Ganogiosta, Nigaso, Oswege, Dukatenyo. My name is Shelley Hill, and I come from 6 Nations of the Grand River. I'm the manager of Indigenous Relations. 1 second. The staff report presented today is a result of a cross-departmental collaboration of the Landmarks and Monuments Work Group, which includes John Summers, Heritage Resource Management, Tourism and Culture Division of the Planning and Economic Development Department, Cynthia Graham, Landscape Architect Services, Environmental Services Division of Public Works Department, and Jennifer Domenico and myself of the Indigenous Relations Team, Children's Services and Neighborhood Development Division in the Healthy and Safe Communities Department. I am joined by our consultant, Melissa Hamill, with the First Peoples Group, and we will co-present a summary of our work to date. As we present the report, we will reflect on the overview, what we heard, as well as next steps. Keeping in mind, acknowledging and respecting the spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional connections that we as Indigenous people have to the land. This connection focuses on coming together as one mind for ongoing peace, integrity, and giving thanks to all creation. I'd like to now introduce Melissa Hamill.
Are you there, Melissa?
Okay.
I am, and Timiguat Shelley for that kind introduction. Good afternoon to you, Chair, and through you to the rest of the committee. Melissa Hamill, Indigenous, Ottawa Ndojaba, Makwadodam. My name is Melissa Hamill, and I'm a senior advisor with First Peoples Group. My dad's family comes from Kitigan Zibi First Nation, and I'm calling in today from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of my ancestors in so-called Ottawa, Ontario. I would like to start by acknowledging and giving thanks to the people of Six Nations of the Grand River and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, and especially to the urban Indigenous community in and around Hamilton for hosting First Peoples Group as we work virtually on this project from across the country, actually. I would also like to thank you, Angie and Shelley, for your acknowledgement of today being Red Dress Day, a day that is really significant for the awareness and education about the tragedy of the disproportional number of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited folks who have gone missing or have been murdered in Canada. The significance of the hanging red dresses at City Hall or here in our homes is to honor the spirits of the women who have been lost. It's my pleasure today to be here to present this report on behalf of my team at First Peoples Group and in honor of the circle of experts who came together to make this report and these recommendations possible. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the Indigenous engagement that we held in the fall, highlighting core themes and Indigenous-centered frameworks that need to be applied to the next phase of work and to continuing work when you are considering landmarks, monuments, interpretation, and commemoration in Hamilton. I will briefly touch on our recommendations as I go through, but we'll leave it to city staff to detail how to move forward with those recommendations within the city structure. Next slide, please, Shelley. So I'll start with the when, the who, and the how. In July of 2019, as you know, the City of Hamilton demonstrated reconciliation leadership when they endorsed the Urban Indigenous Strategy. At the time that the report was written, First Peoples Group was actually working on a long-term reconciliation file with the City of Kingston, and we included the UIS in our report for Kingston as a case study or a strong example of a municipal strategy that makes space for Indigenous voices to be heard, for Indigenous people to lead, and lays the foundation for the good work that is to follow. As you know, out of the UIS implementation plan, a staff working group was created called the Indigenous Landmarks and Monuments Working Group, which is one of several working groups that came out of this ongoing and long-term work. The Indigenous Relations team invited elders, historians, artists, and leaders from the Indigenous community to create a circle of experts. There were 6 members of the circle who came together for 6 engagement sessions throughout the fall of 2021, followed by one-on-one validation of these recommendations in the winter. And I really want to highlight here that this work is not the beginning and the end, but just the tip of the iceberg, and another beginning within some very long-term work that takes a long time. We soon realized that the conversations that we were having about the landmarks and monuments were much bigger than the task at hand. You unfortunately can't just rewrite a plaque without looking at the big picture and how all of these issues are interrelated. We knew early in the process that one of the major recommendations was going to be to expand the Indigenous Relations team at the City of Hamilton to include Indigenous curator positions within the heritage sector and an Indigenous community liaison to implement the community engagement work that is necessary to make changes. And of course, these changes are necessary not only at the level of the individual landmarks and monument sites, but also to make sure that heritage policies and processes at the city are inclusive of Indigenous heritage and public memory. Next slide, please, Shelley. So at First Peoples Group, we often speak to action happening in 3 different buckets. So symbolic change, substantive change, and systemic change. Symbolic actions are necessary and are wonderful, but they can be perceived as a checkbox exercise if they're not backed up with substantive investment and systemic transformation. For this transformation to take place, it's important for individual members of staff and City Council to make that personal commitment to assess your own relationship to colonial structures that you work within, and to understand that Indigenous worldview brings with it gifts that not only help with city Indigenous relations, but also, when applied in a good way, can be transformational for the whole city. So each time we met with the circle of experts, the conversation kept coming back around to these Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And 3 core themes emerged to create a framework for moving forward with this work. So the 3 themes are connection to land, relationships and reciprocity, and cultural humility. And I'd like to take a moment to speak about each of these. In each of these, the sort of series of meetings that we had with the circle of experts, we integrated protocol, and we offered tobacco to Peter Schuler to open and close our meetings in ceremony and in prayer. In each of these moments, Peter grounded us in the teachings about the land, reminding us of our relationship to all living things and our responsibility for taking care of Mother Earth. Because really, and he kept reminding of this, at the end of the day, landmarks and monuments won't mean much if the climate continues to change and the temperature continues to rise. He also reminded us of the 7 generations principle, which is that every decision that we make now in the moment needs to consider the experience of the next 7 generations. So think of your great-grandchildren times 7. And you can think about your great-grandparents. You can think back 7 generations, and that they were making decisions back then that affected where you are today. So when it comes to connection of the land and monuments and landmarks, ideas, we discussed all sorts of ideas that really are might be considered outside of the box, but really have that Indigenous way of knowing and being embedded into them. So ideas like renaturalization of sites where public art or statues or monuments once stood, creating community gardens, growing traditional medicines, expanding and taking care of the tree canopy, connecting Indigenous teachings to the trails and other natural attractions that are already in the area. And one participant even suggested a nature as monuments strategy that could be, developed in the future. The recommendation within the report about prioritizing the building of Indigenous community gathering spaces, both indoors and outdoors, also speaks to this this deep connection to the land and having Indigenous community feel that they see themselves when they're walking through the city. And maybe that's even if that's just, or maybe most importantly, if that is connecting with nature within the city limits. The second core theme was relationships and reciprocity. So the importance of co-creating a city where Indigenous people feel respected, see their culture reflected, not only in the physical spaces, but also in the services provided by the city. We know that the city has an ongoing connection with Six Nations and with Mississaugas of the Credit, and the working group really talked about how to strengthen those connections and how to strengthen connections with the urban Indigenous community as well. And of course, the UIS really lays that out in a good way too. One of my very favorite elder teachings is that relationships are built over 100 cups of tea. So there's that real emphasis on this work, taking a long time, knowing that there might be missteps along the way, and always coming back to that circle and inviting people in for another cup of tea and another cup of tea. It's that emphasis that this is long and slow work. And then finally, the third core theme that we really emphasized in the report was this idea of cultural humility. I was in a training this week where I had this kind of aha moment when we were talking about the diversity of of Métis, Inuit, and First Nations, and also the diversity within each of those groups. That there's no one way that all Métis people think, or all Inuit, or all First Nations think. And in Canada, there are 632 First Nations across the country. My family happens to be from one of them, and I didn't even grow up there. So I always come to my presentations admitting my own cultural humility, that I know so little, and that I have an open mind and an open heart to get to know more. So it's really important, and we have some sort of tips and tricks within the report too on questions that you can ask yourself about your place in the story, how you've benefited from colonialism, for example, and recognizing the diversity of not only Indigenous peoples, but all people who live in and around Hamilton. It's okay to know what you don't know. There's no shame or blame in this work, just responsibility for how you take this work and move it forward. So that recommendation that we put in there about the interpretive signage, like getting out there right now, going to these sites that have been highlighted as problematic and putting up some signage just to say, listen, we know that this site is problematic. We are doing something about it. Please be patient. That really gives a strong sign to anybody who walks into the space, and to know that these conversations are happening and that they're happening in a good way. And there are other municipalities that have done this kind of a project with great success. Next slide, please. So the really exciting thing about this work is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Municipalities across the country are having these really important conversations and are doing the brave work of moving forward in a good way. And there are so many opportunities for collaboration. Within our report, we include a sample framework that can serve to guide City Council and staff when it comes to being in relationship in a good way with Indigenous community. And I'll take this moment also to highlight the importance of cultural awareness training for all staff and council, which was one of the UIS recommendations. And it's just so great to have everybody starting at the same point. So I would invite you to do that if you haven't already. In the report, we also reference some incredible documents that should be examined and used to support landmarks and monuments for the work that needs to be done. So the Parks Canada Framework for History and Commemoration and the University of Manitoba's Framework for Indigenous Community Engagement are two very well-researched documents that can set your teams up for success in planning and implementing the work going forward. Most significantly, though, there are traditional Indigenous teachings that can and should be used to guide this work. So we talked briefly about the 7 generations principle. There's the 7 grandfather teachings. And in your region in particular, I would highly suggest that everyone brushes up on the 2-row wampum and the dish with 1 spoon, and that these be used as frameworks for the work moving forward. The land that Hamilton was built on has incredibly rich history that reaches way far back beyond the 175 years that was recently commemorated. So what a beautiful opportunity that you have in front of you to shift the heritage story from one of colonial and Euro-Canadian landscapes to one that includes and celebrates the people that have been here since time immemorial and are still here today, stronger than ever. So with that, I'll say thank you, Miigwech, and I'll pass things back on to Shelley. Miigwech.
Shelley?
Through the chair. Now I'm Melissa. So this brings us to our way forward. So honoring our roots, creating space for Indigenous voices is a supplementary tool to the Urban Indigenous strategy that will help shape how we are to add the Indigenous voice to the heritage and landscape of Hamilton. The city committed to improving meaningful consultation with urban Indigenous residents and First Nations communities on municipal projects, plans, and approvals with the Urban Indigenous strategy. Both council and staff are aware of the gravity and the importance of this task, but it must be acknowledged that this is not easy work. To improve in this area, a coordinated approach by all departments to commit to making Indigenous relations a top priority is being recommended. The second step will gather info from many different resources about the Indigenous history of the area, and dedicated temporary roles will lead this work. Indigenous curator and Indigenous community liaison are needed to deliver more focused heritage and commemoration, as well as engagement with the Indigenous community in a culturally appropriate way, including the use of traditional knowledge. A community engagement and programming strategies will be implemented that invites Indigenous residents, visitors, and participate in the retelling of history and revisioning of monuments and Indigenous placemaking from their unique perspective. The Circle of Experts discuss many creative ideas for engagement, including but not limited to design charrettes, community mapping, photo voice projects, special events, and wide-scale storytelling to crowdsource the history of the area from Indigenous perspectives. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. I'd like to say Nyawe Miigwech, thank you to the team of First Peoples Group, the Circle of Experts, and the staff and leadership who helped in providing a meaningful work for this journey. We appreciate the opportunity to present today.
Thank you very much. Oops, my mic's not on. Maybe I'm not speaking loud enough. Any questions, councillors, for the staff and our consultant, or would you like to hear from the delegates first and then go to the questions? I'm seeing that as a nod. Excellent. So we need a mover and seconder to receive the presentation, please. Moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Jackson, and we'll have that vote, Madam Clerk.
Chairman Clark, could I
Councillor,
just
go
ask
ahead.
one question, please? Yeah, my apologies, Chairman Clark. Will Melissa Hamill still be around then for questions on both the presentation and the report recommendations? Oh, wonderful. That's all I need.
Giving us a thumbs up, so yes, she's
Thank you.
around.
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
No problem. But there's a report. Okay, so we're going to put off receiving the presentation until we hear from the delegates, just so that we keep the order that makes sense to the clerk and keeps me out of trouble. She's the boss. Okay, so we're going back to delegates now, Madam Clerk. Right? So we will hear the delegates and receive them together at the end. The first delegate on my list, item number 9.1 was withdrawn, so we're on to item 9.2, Miguel Velarde. Miguel, are you with us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody.
Miguel, you have 5 minutes for your presentation, okay?
Thank you. Today we remember the missing Indigenous women here in Toronto. I am speaking from Takaranto Island Gardens. As an Indigenous man from Peru, I don't support colonial systems of oppression. My name is Miguel Avila Velarde. I'm Indigenous from Peru and Quechua. I'm a father and I have 3 children, all of them born here in Tortoise Island. This is my first appearance at a community meeting of the city of Hamilton. I am one of the participants that attended the rally outside City Hall on August 2021. Because apparently it was voted down the request from the community to remove statues of hate and genocide. So it was followed by an action because it calls for an action due to the nature of the findings of 215 children in the city of Kamloops, BC. I read the recommendations today, and I want to say I support honoring our roots and other stakeholders who are recommending changes. The plaque that is supposed to go at Gore Park is a great idea to educate the public, but I'm against to any proposal to erect again the statue of Sir General MacDonald. Estimates count that across Turtle Island, 10,028 graves have been found. I can't believe that this is happening in 2022. We need to move forward with the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, specifically those recommendations that goes to municipalities such as Hamilton. Imagine if the City of Toronto has a request from the former university, now known as Toronto Metropolitan University, to re-erect the statue of Sir Egerton Ryerson. That will call for his resignation. And I think that also will happen if City Council of Hamilton decides to re-erect the statue of Sir John MacDonald. I hope it's not that direction, but rather than to make amendments from the past as we move forward as a country, honoring the memories of these children's graves, and also the murdered Indigenous women. As an Indigenous man from Peru, I'm in solidarity with my cousins, specifically those who live around the city of Hamilton, Six Nations. So, as I said before, I was one of the participants on the action on August 2021. I would like to request that the city of Hamilton consider these recommendations made by honoring our roots, and it's also from another group called Speakers of Truth. I think both have delivered great recommendations to this committee. Hopefully, they will be approved at City Council of Hamilton. So, also, I want to recommend that the statues that are in the report, I think there are 4 locations or 3. Why don't we consider putting them in some museum so people can remember the past, the good things of the past, but also remembering also what happened in truth, because Canadians were not educated as to what has happened since Confederation, how the treatment of Indigenous peoples happened during the residential school systems. So moving forward, it's also good to recommend that the education department teaches the kids about the past and not to be offended by what happened, but in moving forward, change our perspective, our views of who are the Indigenous people of this country. How many minutes I have left?
You have 10
Hello?
seconds.
10 seconds,
10
I'm
seconds.
close to finish. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at this committee and look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Miguel. I appreciate you appearing before our committee today. Councillors, are there any questions of this delegate? Seeing none, Miguel, thank you for your time today. You can follow on us on YouTube to see the remaining part of the meeting. Thank you again, sir.
You're welcome.
We're now moving on to our next delegate, Lyndon George of the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center. I'd like to call upon Lyndon, respecting the Landmarks and Monuments Review. Lyndon, if you're there. Yeah, there you are. You're ahead of me. Let me know when you're ready to start, and you'll have 5 minutes, sir. Oh, can't hear you, Lyndon.
Sorry about that. I am ready, Chair.
There we go. Now I can start your clock.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lyndon George. I'm the Executive Director of Hamilton's Anti-Racism Resource Center. And I'm here today to talk about the report before you. I'd like to thank the Circle of Experts for their time and commitment that they've put into providing us a path forward. I would like to thank the staff city staff who have worked on this and presented earlier today. By not heeding the recommendations of the Circle of Experts to remove the remaining components of the Sir John A. statue, it puts the consultation and relationship building priorities at risk. The city failed to hear that from the community at previous council meetings and by previous public delegations. And as a result, the city witnessed a do-it-yourself removal of the Sir John A. statue, leading to further distrust and alienation in our community. This is an important opportunity to course correct, to listen to the voices of Hamilton's Indigenous community, as outlined in the report, appropriately titled Honoring Our Roots and Creating Space for Indigenous Voices. I would like to bring to the attention of the committee pages 10 and 11 of the report. And I'd like to take this opportunity to read directly from it. And it says, the Circle of Experts recommend that the following actions be taken at each of the highest priority sites that were discussed at the meeting. And I'd like to point out here specifically the former site of the Sir John A. Macdonald statue. The first point is, do not relocate or reinstall the statue. Second point, remove remaining components of the Sir John A. statue, including the pedestal and cannons, to be able to create spaces for reimagination of the site. Third point, have a ceremony to cleanse the site. And the fourth point, have a public design charrette involving both Indigenous and non-Indigenous members of the public to re-envision how the space could be used. I think it's important to highlight that. And I know in the staff report, I went through it. And these are the points that I didn't see. And I would like us to emphasize what we heard from community many months ago, what we heard from the previous speaker regarding the trauma and the experience. And when we talk about truth and reconciliation, that we are listening to the voices of Hamilton's Indigenous community. These are important steps. Another part from the report is, and I want to highlight this, while Sir John A. Macdonald is the hot button topic in Hamilton because of the way the statue was removed, it is important not to let this discussion overshadow all of the other important work that needs to be done. While relocating or reinterpretation of the Sir John A. Macdonald site might have been a possibility had the statue been removed intentionally by the city, reinstallation of the statue now would be a step in the wrong direction. Clearing the site, placing all remaining components in storage indefinitely would allow for future community engagement to happen in a good way. And that's what we're looking for here, a path forward. The report provides the early steps to begin that, but we need you, through this committee, through council, to hear that voice and to follow that path. I hope that this committee will hear that. Today's a poignant day. It's the reason why we're here, and I hope that you will have an opportunity to begin that work in the months and the days ahead. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lyndon. Well within your time. Councillors, are there any questions of Lyndon? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Again, you can follow on YouTube. If you can close off your microphone and your camera. I do sincerely appreciate your participation today. Okay, councillors, so I'm assuming, clerk, we should receive the delegations. So I need a mover and a seconder to receive the delegations, moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Pauls, and we'll have that vote. And the vote is carried unanimously. And now, Madam Clerk, do you want us to deal with the staff presentation, or shall we go to questions of staff in general and deal with the presentation and the report all at the same time?
Mr. Chair, procedurally, it would be better to deal with the presentation first, asking questions of staff, then receiving the report, receiving the presentation, then moving on to questions on the report.
Perfect. Okay. Any questions for staff regarding the actual presentation? Seeing none, so we can receive the staff presentation, moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Marula. And we'll have that vote. And it's up. And then now we're going to 2 seconds to catch up. Boom. And that vote carried unanimously, 4-0. And so now we would go to 8.1, correct, Madam Clerk? Before we begin the consideration of landmarks and monuments review, I'd like to remind committee members to ensure that they are looking at the revised version of the report. I need a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor for consideration by the committee. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Marula. So the report is now before us and open to questions. Councillor Jackson, you may start us off.
Thank you, Chair Clark, and please forgive me if, to help me understand getting answers to the report and questions I have, I may parlay into the Honoring Our Roots excellent document that was presented mostly by Melissa Hamill, the associate, with First Peoples Group and Manager Hill. So if you would allow me just a bit of latitude, I would be very grateful for that, just to get fulsome of answers to my questions, please.
That is completely logical and reasonable, and I will start you 5 minutes now, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Clark. First of all, Manager Hill, I can't see Manager Hill or the associate Hamill. Are they there? Oh, there. Okay, there's Manager Hill.
Melissa,
Good.
Melissa, could you put your camera? Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Now we'll start your 5 minutes, Tom.
Everybody knows I hate talking to a ghost, so thank you very much. Nice to meet you, Melissa Hamill, virtually, and I hope someday soon in person, in light of hopefully finally defeating this Omicron once and for all in our society. Okay, as I started by, I moved to adopt the revised recommendations of the report. So please, Manager Hill, you and I have had some discussions in the past. So whatever I'm going to ask, I just want to ask to better understand from my standpoint, and bringing some of my own community's past into the equation as we move forward collectively. Mr. Chairman, through you, Manager Hill, on page 3 of the Landmarks Monuments report, page 3 near the bottom. Following this initial report, the next phase, Chair Clark, of the Landmarks Review will include further consultation engagement with Indigenous and non-Indigenous community to build relationships and great understand of Indigenous history and contributions, reimagining city spaces, and this is the key words for me, and ensuring all voices are heard. Can you, either Manager Hill or Associate Hamill, Melissa, please help me if my interpretation of that truly means all voices be heard, or is that just all voices within all aspects of the variety of Indigenous peoples, Métis, Six Nations, otherwise? Through you, Chair Clark, if one of them could help me with that, please.
Thank you. Melissa?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. Yes, the recommendation is really that the process moving forward include everyone. We saw this as a real starting point, and it's the public needs to be engaged on these issues. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for that reassurance that all voices to be heard, and bringing the next step, the non-Indigenous community, into the equation as well. For the locations that have been identified as the most problematic, can I just ask sincerely, with the removal of the Sir John A. Macdonald statue at Gore Park and what's left there, I think there's a couple of cannons left there, a plaque, whatever. Why would we even want to spend any money putting the Indigenous, if you will, putting some kind of Indigenous plaque there when the McDonald's statue is completely gone, unless is that part and parcel of cleansing the site, as the term has been used? Through you, Chair Clark, please.
Melissa?
Yes, and through you, Chair. Happy to provide some clarification there, because we had several conversations about this. as we went, and there was maybe some misunderstanding about the site itself and the timeline of events that led to where we are today. So it was presented to the Circle of Experts and to us at First Peoples Group from the beginning of the process that even before the statue came down, that the intention, because of work that would be ongoing in that location, was for this statue to possibly be relocated across the street or taken down while the site be developed. So when the statue came down, and that was from the starting point that we had with the Circle of Experts, it was almost a non-starter. Like, why wouldn't you just clear the rest of the space if we're going to be talking about what the possibilities are for the future anyway? So there was some conversation around that, and then it was really exciting, the sparks that came out of that, because once people could imagine a cleared space, whether it was that physical space or across the street, it was I remember Rick Hill kind of lighting up and going, we could have a charrette, we could have this Indigenous led activity that involves the whole public, whoever wants to be involved, that is a moment, an opportunity, a learning moment for education to the general public about why these issues are so important to Indigenous peoples. So when you were talking, and I just want to clarify there about putting up a plaque, what we're picturing with this signage that we're talking about at these problematic sites is not something permanent. It's not like a traditional, brass plaque that is put up. It's, maybe a laminated sign. I don't know the sort of the technical terms for it, but City of Kingston did this really well before their statue came down. And it was a sign that just explains that, I mean, obviously the site itself is charged with tension at the moment because of the way that the statue came down. So it's just a sign to say, we know that this is a site, that the site is problematic, or that there was tension here, and we're working through this, and we're going to keep your eye out for public engagement and opportunities to learn more about this and to be part of envisioning what will happen next. And I guess that's the big question mark is
Okay.
what happens next.
Shelley, do you have anything to add?
No. Yep, please. Between the two of you, anytime, please. Thank you.
Now, I think Melissa expressed it quite well. I think it's important that we continue to communicate and to continue to share, those steps and the work that we're doing towards, education and allowing others to understand what's going on. And I think that's very important. So it's getting that communication out there.
Thank you, Manager. Chair Clark, I have a series of questions, so just at any time say, Councillor, going on the second time speakers list, please.
You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds, sir.
You're always so meticulous with that clock of yours. Okay. Anyways, Melissa, thank you really for the fulsome of your explanation. Manager Hill, I'm going to ask you this another time, as I did last year. I read here on the Honoring Our Roots document, page 11 at the bottom, the Circle of Experts did not want statues or monuments of Indigenous warriors or elders added to the city catalog. Obviously, then I must be in a minority voice and opinion. Manager Hill, Melissa, you won't recall unless you were listening in last year, but Manager Hill, you may recall in our chats we've had and in the public committee and council meetings, I always thought about preserving the history that many of us a century later have inherited in this great country of Canada, my humble opinion, and building alongside of it and restoring and building alongside of it what was missing with the injustices of the Indigenous communities and the tribes and the people of First Nations and Aboriginals people. Yet here it says the Circle of Experts said they do not want to go in that direction. Can you educate me, please, and explain to me why they don't want to, and why, obviously, I'm of an adverse opinion to that, a different opinion to that. Through you, Chair Clark, please.
Thank you. Melissa, would you like to start, please?
Sure. And for this answer, I can also pull from the work that we did for 3 years at the City of Kingston as well, where we held a year and a half worth of community conversations, and this topic came up over and over. And again,
Okay.
there's a little bit of nuance there. So I think what we heard from the from the Circle of Experts was that Indigenous peoples, and I don't want to sound pan-Indigenous, you are definitely going to meet Indigenous people within your constituency who would love to see a statue of a chief. But overall, I'll say that the what we heard from the majority of these circles was that it's just not something. So it's just not something that Indigenous people do to commemorate one individual or one sort of event or moment in time, and especially this idea of putting that person up on a pedestal. So here in Ottawa, for example, a bridge was recently renamed to honor a significant chief from my First Nation, from Kitigan-Zibi. And I remember having this really beautiful conversation with a family member who said, you know, they should really call it the Commanda Family Bridge rather than putting him up on a pedestal, because he wouldn't be the person he was without his mother and his aunties and his daughters and his, you know, the strong women that hold him up. So this idea of naming something or commemorating a larger teaching versus just one person. So that's not to say that certain sites can be added to with a true story. So a really good example of that is, for example, you've got a couple of sites that honor the Loyalist story. The wording on those plaques is problematic because it talks about the Loyalists coming to Canada, and Canada wasn't Canada at that point. So there's some tweaking that needs to be done. There's also no mention of the Indigenous people who worked alongside or would have been here when those events happened. So certainly in those cases, adding that story, if we're going to keep the statue there, is something that the Indigenous community would welcome. But when people say, how about we keep up this important statue and then build 5 Indigenous statues, that's the part that's problematic, because you know, what we heard from the Circle and what we hear across the country is, why are we putting money into a statue to commemorate a thing when we could be building gardens, teaching people how to survive as we move forward towards you know, a dismal you know, place where Mother Earth is going to be, or towards public art that brings community together, where, you know, the All Our Relations project is a really good example of that. You can use that beautiful commemorative art piece, and have it be a place where Indigenous people can feel comfortable meeting and showing off their culture, and where the public can come and learn about Indigenous culture. So it's a little bit more nuanced than a yes or no of just adding things. There's definitely opportunities for that.
Really appreciate that answer, Melissa. Yeah, no, really do. Chair Clark, how am I doing? Oh, Manager Hill, I apologize. Did you want to jump in there? Sorry.
No, no problem. Through the chair. You know, it's just very important, you know, that we have reminders to be connected to the land, right? And the importance of the significance of how all of creation sustains us. And if anything, it will help us in the future to have those reminders, is all I wanted to add.
Okay. How am I doing, Chair?
You have 1 minute, 7 seconds, sir.
Okay. 2 more questions, please. Again, for my edification and learning experience here. Is the next steps and potential further next steps, Melissa, could it hypothetically, for these sites that have been identified, the initial one's problematic, I take it that's just, there may be others in the next steps, because as you recall, the name Dundas has come up in the past as problematic as well. I don't know about Sir Wilfrid Laurier, one of our former prime ministers with the rec center. So is it hypothetically potentially possible that after the inscriptions, beside these problematics to correct history, is it hypothetically possible that there may be removal of these sites as well down the road? And I'm not here to obligate either one of you or not to try to pigeonhole either one of you. If you're not comfortable answering that, so be it. I'm just trying to understand and anticipate what might be. Through you, Chair Clark, please.
Thank you. Melissa?
I think if I had a crystal ball, I could answer that. But I have no way of knowing, how this ripples. But just to know that it's a global conversation, and the UK is a great example. If you look to what the UK is doing in statues that are coming down and others that are being having that conversation come up, you're going to be seeing this around the world. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But this is where hiring that Indigenous curator and Indigenous liaison position is really, really crucial, because they can help with the citywide interpretation policy. And you can write into those, those systemic policies, how to deal with this as it comes up, or what sensitivities need to be considered as you move forward.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Shelley, anything to add?
Through the chair, I just want to say that it'll allow us to have conversation. It allows to bring the voices together on what they'd like to see on the outcome. And to me, it's a learning experience, throughout for everyone. Right. And sometimes I feel that, and maybe it's not just me, but others feel that their voice has not been heard. And this will provide that opportunity to have sort of that shared collaboration on an outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, that concludes your 5 minutes. Would you like me to put you on the list for a second time?
Please, I have one last big question. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional speakers, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Marula, do you have any questions? Okay, Councillor Marula, could you take the chair for me, please, as Vice Chair?
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, sir. Is it fair to say that we're at the point where discussions about taking down the future monuments is premature because we have not concluded the consultation that is being suggested in these reports? To either Melissa or Shelley.
Who would like to answer that question?
I can start through the chair. That's a tough question. We heard the voice of our Indigenous peoples, and I think it's important to create safe spaces for these kind of discussions. Melissa?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that what you said in the previous question, Shelley, and that that opportunity for learning along the way. I think you'd have a lot less of a chance of statues coming down in the way that the Sir John A. Macdonald statue came down in Hamilton, if people are provided the space to have those conversations. And it's difficult to speak within the confines of a consultation that has a start date and an end date, but those safe spaces can be provided now. It's about those 100 cups of tea and learning from each other, and making moves with intention.
When I thank you, Chair. May I proceed? When I read the report, I envisioned the beginning of a conversation and relationship between nations. Is that a fair description of where we are, that these discussions are not going to be finite? These discussions are really opening the doors to further conversations between the First Nations within our community and within the urban Indigenous community. That's really where we're headed with this. That as opposed to being two ships passing in the night, we're now actually having conversations and working together to improve our communities and our land, the collective land, everyone together.
Yeah, through you, Chair, that is our biggest hope. I don't want to take away from relationships that have been built with local First Nations. Certainly, really good work has been done in the past with stops and starts, right? But when this work makes its way into your work plans and into your policies, then you've got a way to have those 100 cups of tea, knowing that if things go off the rail, there's a protocol for coming and getting back together. I think of tough conversations that I've had with elders in talking circles where they come and give me a hug ahead of time and say, this isn't going to be an easy conversation. And then there's a whole lot of truth telling that happens. And then we hug each other and say, see you next time.
But we have
it
to
will
be
be
up
exactly
for
like
those
that,
conversations.
you have to be in.
We need to be.
Sorry, one at a time,
Yeah, it's that
Councillor.
intentionality. It's that intentionality.
Yeah, we need to, what would the word be? Embrace those opportunities for dialogue and working together as we move forward. Chair, can I ask staff, the Sir John A. Macdonald, what's left of the statue there, the base, I'm not even using the correct terminology and I apologize, but whatever is left over, I heard that there was discussions about moving it to another location because of the master plan for that Gore Park. So where is that still a process that is before
Who
us?
on staff would like to take that question? Would that be Shelley? Shelley?
Through the chair, I'd like to ask Carrie if she'd like to answer that question.
Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Carrie Brooks Joyner. I'm the Director of Tourism and Culture. Cynthia Graham would be answering this question. She is in another meeting, so I agreed to address the question should it come forward. So in January 2010, the Gore Park Master Plan and Preferred Conceptual Plan was approved by City Council. And as part of that redevelopment scheduled for Veterans Place block, it was to create a public art piece on John Street. The statue of Sir John A. at the east end of the park was to be temporarily moved to ensure the redevelopment of the site. So the approved plan had the statue moved from its present location to across the street.
And so that, Chair, that plan is still in play. That's where we're headed.
Carrie?
Through the chair, that plan is delayed, but it is still the approved plan on the books. Yes.
So the reason I'm asking is I'm sensing that there's an opportunity where if we were to put the cannons in storage because they need to be restored to begin with, they're old, and the monument base, I guess, would need to be disassembled, but then that would enable an area in Gore Park to have some of these gatherings and discussions and continue the dialogue that we're having about monuments. Was that the hope, I guess, of the circle of experts?
Shelley or Melissa?
Yes.
That's what that's what we were picturing. Yeah.
Okay.
They're in concurrence, Councillor Clark.
That's helpful. I think those are all my questions for the time, Chair. I appreciate you intervening here.
No problem. The chair is
I'll
yours.
take the chair back, and I believe I've got Councillor Pauls as a first-time questioner. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, and through the chair. Melissa, I love what you said about more cups of tea, one more cup, so we could talk longer. And I just love that. But my question is, what is the end result? Is the end result to remove other statutes or renaming schools, changing city rec centers, or just to learn more about our history and learn more about our history of Indigenous people?
Thank you, Councillor. Melissa, would you like to begin?
Sure, through you, Chair. I think the end result is a city where everybody who either lives there or visits sees their story and their voice in the public art, in the heritage and the commemoration. I think we have to start by acknowledging that the whole point of statues, for example, is to tell a colonial narrative, and there's a power structure there, but it's not only the Indigenous voice that's missing. The women's voice is missing. The LGBTQ2S voice is missing. The new Canadian and newcomer voice is missing. So I think that you've got this beautiful opportunity here as part of this review, and especially of reviewing, as I said, your policies to consider how to be more inclusive of many voices and diverse voices when you're considering what heritage looks like. There are also, opportunities for highlighting Indigenous history that people who live or visit Hamilton and the area don't even know about. So sites that are significant to Indigenous peoples that could be turned into not necessarily just a plaque, but a program or a walking tour or an education opportunity or a community garden. So we have to think outside of the box. And as I said before, I don't know which names will change and which how things will change in that respect. But I think your end goal needs to be that people walk through the city and enjoy the nature within the city and see their story reflected, not just Indigenous folks.
Right. So, Melissa, could we
Councillor, Angela Burden is...
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. GM Burden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the councillor. I agree with what Melissa has shared, and I want to just re-emphasize what we've heard in terms of this is the beginning of a learning journey and a community building process. And the scope of the report really is these 5 problematic sites. And to Councillor Jackson's earlier question about what will happen in the future, I think there's been some allusion to what will happen of renaming. Certainly, we've seen that in other jurisdictions. But I do want to say that one of the things that I have appreciated about the spirit of the report and the spirit of the conversations is that we are working together along this journey and respecting voice and respecting the fact that this, I think Shelley said it earlier, that it takes time, and that as we move together and include all of those voices, some of those things will naturally unfold. And as we get direction from Council on the recommendations before you today, that really puts in motion these first steps. And so some of the questions that are being asked of today, I would say we don't know the answers to, but the commitment and the spirit of cultural humility and the connection to the land and the relationships and reciprocity are the guiding principles by which the conversations will unfold, and our next steps as a community of Hamilton will unfold as well.
Thank you. Shelley, would you have anything to add?
Through the chair, just to add to Melissa and Angie's comments, that this is definitely a learning opportunity in many ways, especially with bringing our Indigenous, stories to the forefront in understanding of who we are and the value of who we are. Because, when we think about residential schools and all the outcomes of what's affected us, we're resilient and we're still here, and we need to honor that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pauls?
Yes, and thank you, Angela. You did answer some of my other questions I wanted to ask. So thank you for doing that. And I do want to thank you, Shelley and Melissa. I really enjoyed the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Oh, Councillor Jackson, you're on as a second time. Would you like to?
Yes, can I proceed, Chair Clark?
Absolutely.
Thank you. You kind of left that with a ... after you said Councillor Jackson a second time. Okay.
It was a bit of a tease, wasn't it?
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
my last, it's a commentary, and I would like for Melissa, if she could hear me out, I would just really appreciate hearing any comments she wants to make to my commentary here. So Melissa, Manager Hill will recall from last year, the main reason why I had not voted to remove the McDonald statue being of Armenian background, fully appreciating a genocide of the with the Indigenous people of our country, but my own ancestors, quickly Chair Clark, going through their own genocide of 1915 at the hands of the Ottoman Turks. So fast forward, Melissa, where I was coming from and where I still am coming from is the fact that this country of Canada, under a constituted country from 1867 and continuous to this day, allowed refugees, immigrants to come to this country to start a new home that otherwise, in my family's case, in my wife's Polish ancestral family's case through the Second World War, and even what we're seeing in the last year with Afghani refugees coming after the Taliban took over, and now with the Ukrainian refugees that our country is welcoming with open arms. How does somebody of these cultural backgrounds, refugees, immigrants from these other cultural backgrounds, where do we get an opportunity to say thank you to this country for opening its arms and giving our ancestors an opportunity at life, at a new home? Many of them, as I'm sure you would appreciate, came penniless, nothing but hope, desire, and hard work, many without formal education. Otherwise, if the constituted country of Canada did not exist, possibly, they may have had to stay in their homeland, and my family and my wife's family could never have come to this country of Canada. Any response, any reaction to that, please? And I say that so genuinely and sincerely. And that's my last comment, Chair Clark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you,
Let's
Chair.
start with Melissa, and then we'll have Shelley get a comment too.
Great. Yeah, through you, Chair. I look forward to conversations to come, Councillor Jackson, because this is a whole cup of tea in itself, and a complex question for sure, because we never want to undermine those experiences. I think that the best thing that we can do is to teach newcomers this truth of the story that the country that they're coming to. I was once in the presence of somebody giving a tour of a residential schools exhibit at the Wabano Centre for Aboriginal Health, and there was a woman there who had just received her citizenship on Friday, so she would have probably known more about the facts of Canadian history than I did in that moment, because there's so much that you need to go through to get that citizenship. And she cried when she heard the stories that were told. She said, I always had this vision of Canada in my head as this utopia, and I always wanted to get there. And now I'm here, and I'm learning that the same thing happened here as to what happened to my family back home. So having these educational moments is the way to move forward, is the way to say thank you. There's no doubt that really good things have happened in our country over the last, 150, I'm going to even say 300 years. There's no doubt that there were good relationships, that there were good people along the way. It's the intent of the systems that were, especially the Indian Act, that were created to remove a people that was evil, that was not well intentioned. And I would love to continue this conversation because I do have a lot to say about it, but fear that we don't have time today. But just to know that you've got this real opportunity here to create that story that is not just one-sided and that is inclusive of all of those beautiful newcomer stories as well. One more thing I'll just add is that something to look to or to kind of study if you're looking back at that true history is the privilege that was given to a lot of these newcomers. They were given land that was taken from somewhere else. So while Indigenous people were being controlled and forced onto reserves, these swaths of land were being given away freely or for a small price, so that immigrants could come and prosper and become, farmers and workers and prosper. So those power dynamics have a story that weaves its way throughout our history, and it's just facts. It's just important that we all know both sides of that story and the true history.
Thank you for even taking the courage and time to respond to my sharing of my own family story, Melissa.
Yeah.
And when you're in person in Hamilton, I'll take you up on that offer to get together with a cup of tea. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Clark. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Shelley, did you have anything to add to respond to Councillor Jackson's comments?
Through the chair, just to add to what Melissa's saying, our intent is to round out, the history, the true history, and these are John Summers' words. So, John, I'd just like to borrow that statement. Is we'd like to round out the true history, and it's really important. And yes, I think it's very important to add sort of that education piece to the newcomers and to understand truly, who the original peoples of this land are, and the history and everything that's involved with it. It's just very important all around. So, thank you.
Thank you, Manager Hill. Much appreciated. Thanks, Chair Clark.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Marula, if you could just take the chair, I just wanted to make some comments to round out our conversation today, hopefully.
It's yours. The floor is yours. Yes.
When I was at Queen's Park, I found it fascinating that consideration and discussions with Indigenous communities or consulting Indigenous communities across this province was never front of mind. And when I was elected to Hamilton Council, it was, I think, in my second year on the council, I was at the Battle of Stony Creek, a big annual festival that happens. And I was watching the reenactment and watching all of the reenactors set up their shops, their tents and everything. And it looks like a small village from that time. And there were men who were dressed up in an Indigenous costume. And when I approached them, I learned they weren't Indigenous. They were reenactors trying to portray what transpired in that battle. And what portrayed in that battle is the Americans were invading and the British were fighting back, and it was Indigenous warriors that came down off the mountain to Lower Stony Creek. At that time, it wouldn't have been Lower Stony Creek. And many of them died in that battle, a gruesome, gruesome battle to preserve the lands that they knew. And they were working with British soldiers. And I remember coming to council and asking, isn't there something that we can do to honor and commemorate and give homage to the Indigenous nations that came forward during that battle. And from that, we ended up doing a public art ask, and we ended up with the Four Eagles Monument that is in the front of Battlefield Park. Jump from that to where we are today, I think it's fair to say that what we're trying to do is build relationships with the nations, the Indigenous nations that are in our community. And we're trying to do that in an honest way to ensure that we're having discussions with them on items that the city may be doing. But on this particular file, it is crucial that we have not just a discussion with the Indigenous communities and their leaders, but with the broader community as well, because it is an education. When you sit across from each other having tea, as Melissa and Shelley have said, and we truly listen to each other, we learn from each other. And I think that's what we're asking. I think that's what our staff are asking. I think that's what the circle of experts are asking, is for people to take a breath and let's work together and see how we can move forward with a landmark and monument policy that embraces the true history of Hamilton and Canada on a go-forward basis, and doesn't lose sight of the real things that happened. Sometimes, I mean, in politics, we have a habit of glossing over things, Melissa. It's just human nature. And in this case, we're slowing down and really having that conversation. So I commend our staff that have done this work. I commend all of the folks who have come out to these consultations. And I hope the next round of those consultations really brings us together so that we can move forward together as a community. Hamilton, Councillor Jackson, after amalgamation, which a lot of the smaller communities didn't like, but it was Hamilton and it was a city of communities. And if you step back one step further, it's more than just those communities. It's a city of communities and a city of nations, because we do have the 6 nations within our area. So I just want to provide that comment, Chair Marula. I think we're doing good work here. Yes, it's going to be painful at times. We're going to have people pushing, and it's fair. Absolutely. We want to hear that. We don't want to simply dismiss it. We want to hear it, and we want to share all of our positions so that hopefully as we move forward, we can come forward and create a real community and move forward from there. So, Melissa, the work of your organization is tremendously helpful. Thank you. Shelley, your leadership goes without saying. Thank you. So with that, I'll take the chair back and...
All said, then the chair is yours.
Thank you, sir. Now I need my glasses because I can't read. Where are we now, Madam Clerk? Okay, so on the presentation then? Okay, so we're now on to the report, and I'm not sure if I had a mover or seconder. Councillor Jackson moved it. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Councillor Marula, you seconded. Thank you. If there's no further questions or comments, we'll now move to the vote. On the report. What I would do without this clerk, I don't know. She bowed just so everyone notices. It was a curtsy. And I laughed and my glasses fogged up. And the vote carries 4-0. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, staff, for helping us today. And so now we're going into, that's what I was looking for. Thank you. Got it. 10.1 is the LGBTQ Advisory Committee Citizen Committee Report respecting recommendations from the community conversations. Is there any discussions on 10.1? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Pauls. And we'll have the vote, please. Votes up. Thank you, Madam Clerk. And that vote carries 4-0. Thank you. We're now moving on to item 10.2, update on youth violent crimes motion. I would like to call upon Angie Burden, the General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities, to introduce this item. Angie, please turn on your camera and microphone. Look at that, you're way ahead of me.
Thank you,
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Angie Burden, General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee members. I'm happy to introduce the discussion item that provides an update on youth violent crimes motion that was approved by Council on October 7th, 2021. Staff have made good progress towards addressing the items in the motion, and we're happy to discuss that today. Before I introduce the report, however, I'm really excited to share some news that Hamilton has been identified as an eligible recipient under the Public Safety Canada's Building Safer Community Funds. The purpose of the funding is to support municipalities and Indigenous communities to develop community-based prevention and intervention strategies and initiatives to tackle gun and gang activities. We didn't plan this, but the timing is absolutely serendipitous. And I'm happy to share today that as this report comes to you, we have resources to help implement the next steps of a plan. And Hamilton is eligible for up to $3.982 billion over the next 4 years. So this will go a long way to furthering the resources that are available through our through the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And this news was shared in confidence with the Executive Steering Committee last week. We did get approval to mention it and share it at committee today.
That is really good news, Angela. We should clap. Having the resources to help us with this and having the federal government recognize the need in our community. Wow, good work. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, and Chair Clark, we can't take a lot of credit for the proposal development because there was not a formal call for proposals. Hamilton was identified as a community that would benefit from the funding, and it was a federal algorithm. So we're very excited around using this as prevention funding, and we're working with our community partners to develop a plan that will be approved by Public Safety Canada, and we'll bring that funding agreement back to Council for approval.
I sense the machinations of former Councillor Collins might be at play in the government. That's fantastic. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So happy to take any questions on that. If not, Chair Clark, I would like to go to the report that we're sharing today.
Any questions about that announcement? Seeing none, go ahead, Angela.
So with regard to the report that we're sharing today, our Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan and Hamilton's Youth Strategy members have been working together along with community partners to develop a citywide action plan response to youth violence. To date, staff have engaged with over 50 service providers in Hamilton, and they are in the process of engaging further with those most impacted by this issue, including youth and Black service providers, to inform the development of the action plan. One key takeaway from the report is the acknowledgement that youth violence is a complex issue with a wide range of risk factors, ranging from a lack of sense of belonging, impacts of trauma, mental health, and/or substance use concerns, poverty, systemic racism and bias, and others. And it requires meaningful community-led engagement to determine the best way to prevent and address locally. Hamilton has a solid foundation of services that support youth involved in violence, from initiatives that address the root causes like poverty to extrajudicial programs to enforcement. And at the same time, there is opportunity to strengthen and coordinate our response to this issue. So we might be looking at increasing access to services, more wraparound support, culturally appropriate care, and ensuring a healing and trauma-informed approach as some examples. The success of the plan relies on a collaboration with community partners to ensure a comprehensive community-driven response that both prevents and addresses violent youth crimes. And the city will support community partners in the development of this action plan by providing coordination support, bringing partners together for discussion, and identifying community leads to champion and move the work forward. I think really important to acknowledge that city staff do not have the expertise in this area, but really need to work with partners that are working with that level of expertise, and also engaging lived experience of our youth as a priority as we move forward. Further updates of the work will be provided to the Emergency and Community Services Committee through reporting on Hamilton's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And I know that Jen Hohull is here, as well as Chelsea Kirkby, both to provide a little bit more information should there be questions. Happy to turn it over to Jen to see if I have missed anything at your direction, Chair Clark.
Thank you, Jen. There you are. Please proceed. Oh, I can't even speak. Go ahead, Jennifer.
through the chair, I believe Angie covered everything, and like we said, we're happy to answer any questions you may have on the report.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Councillor Pauls, please.
Thank you. I don't know if it's a question, but I want to tell you, I was disappointed that Frederick couldn't make it today from Liberty for Youth. I've been on the board for over 6 years, and I know why he's not here, because he called me, and he's going to come another time. He's running 21 kilometers, and we're going to different places. Tomorrow, we're going to the paramedics in Ancaster, and he has 21 kilometers and 21 speaking engagement. So he called me last night and said that he couldn't make it. And but I am so glad that you are partnering with other organizations that have proven record of what to do. And my question is actually, you said we were getting $3.9 billion in the next 4 years. Is that Hamilton alone?
I think it was million, but
it was
came out as billion. I was kind of hoping that the mistake was real.
So is it for Hamilton alone, the 3.9 million?
Angela?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, might have been a Freudian slip, but it is for Hamilton alone over the next 3 years. And we may be a bit delayed in starting, so the dollars are available at any point. However, we do need to have a plan. So it may take us into the new year to develop that plan, which would give us 3 years till the end of March 2026 to spend those dollars. So it's nice that we have a 3-year horizon, a little bit longer, to be able to develop the plan and then implement something. And I do want to, for the record, correct, it was not billion, but million.
I thought I heard billions. That's why.
Yes, you maybe did. I'm an optimist.
It was an Austin Powers slip, right?
It's great, but I can't wait till after this meeting and call. We call him Father Frederick, actually, and he has done so much for the community. To tell him the good news, what's happening here in Hamilton, he'll be very happy. And actually, I'll see him tomorrow morning with that meeting with some of the students there that he's having the chief speaking to them. And it's going to be a great morning tomorrow. So thank you again, and great news.
Thank you. Any other questions from the other council committee members? Seeing none, Councilor Marula, would you mind? I'm sorry to keep calling upon you there. If you could take the chair for a second.
It's the title, I guess. It's on the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. Just a preface to my questions. The shooting that occurred in Upper Stony Creek, where 3 people were shot, and a young Caden Bond was killed. He was 17 years old. And we, Paramount Alliance Church, just across the road, had a prayer march on Sunday and a little service afterwards, and I attended, and it was really a gut-wrenching moment, but realizing that the community really has come together to embrace the family to help them move through this with grace and with prayers. That's what prompted me to look at Operation Ceasefire and these other operations around North America. That prompted me to bring back this motion here to this committee, and this committee unanimously supported it and recommended it to council. So I'd like to ask, Chair, as we move forward, and I know that there's a couple of programs that are intersecting, but I'd like to ask Jennifer or Angie what they envision as we move forward. How are we going to reach out to the broader community? Because the culture of guns, gangs, and drugs is now really impacting our youth. And peer pressure and broken families and poverty, and it's all just leading to this overwhelming sense of despair. And next thing you know, they're involved in criminal activity. How do you foresee us moving forward to have this discussion with other community groups, faith communities, schools, parents, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to not lose a youth?
Yeah, through the chair, it's a great question. And I know Angie mentioned at the beginning that we've spoke to over 50 service providers so far. And again, just scratching the surface of those who want to be involved in the conversation. 2 kind of main areas I want to touch upon in response to your question. One is really connecting in through our Hamilton Community Safety and Wellbeing partners and the system leadership table we have in place. We do have both school boards and post-secondary institutions sitting at that table. So I think there is a strong relationship there to understand and connect with some of the service providers. Also, I think a main focus of our next steps will be engaging those youth who are actually involved in guns and gangs in our community. We are pairing with and working very closely with Jessica Chase and Irene Heffernan with her youth strategy. And you saw that strategy come forward last month. So we're understanding how we can engage youth in a way that's meaningful for them. We're also working with a small group of service providers who are on the ground and providing service to youth involved in guns and gangs. And they're really leading and informing how we connect into the youth and how we get feedback on having conversations and how their voice can inform the plan.
Thank you for that. And Chair, if I may, at the prayer service, Frederick was actually sitting right beside me, so we had an opportunity to chat, and I knew that he couldn't make it here today, but he has a calling to assist young people in this regard. And Caden was a member of Liberty for Youth. But it's still, even though he was embraced by Liberty for Youth and he had a place to go and his family supported, his mother supported him, it still happens. So we need to go beyond just 1 or 2 groups. We need to spread whatever is a successful program with groups like Liberty for Youth or the chaplains that are working at the detention center up on the mountain there. It slips my mind. I'm sorry, Chair. We need to have a broader involvement across this community. And so when I see the money that the federal government and the fact that we didn't apply for it indicates to me that they're aware of the issues in our community. It gives me hope that we can tackle this problem head on and create a made in Hamilton from the grassroots. Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, it can't come from the top down. It can't come from this illustrious body of city council saying, we've got the solution, here's how we're going to fix it, because it's not going to work. We need to do it from the grassroots up, from young people, from families, from all of the agencies and groups who are currently working with the young people to create a program that will succeed in our community and save lives, lead them to productive roles in our community where they're actually helping their family and their community. So I'm really pleased with where we are on this program at this point. I have tremendous hope that the community will have aspirations for a greater success through these programs, and that together we can collaborate and come up with that. And I just want to thank the staff for their work, but more importantly, the 50 groups that were involved and the many more groups that we're going to be reaching out to through this second phase. I'm encouraging them to be candid and speak their mind. We need to fix this because no one wants a family to go through this again. So I thank you for that. And Chair, I'll take the chair back from you. Thank you, sir. Any further questions or comments to our staff on this particular item? None? Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder, correct, Madam Clerk, to receive the report. Councillor Pauls, excellent, thank you. And Councillor Marula will second it, thank you. We'll have that vote first. Then we need to, thank you, and that carries. And did we need to approve the, it was just, so it was an information report, correct. Thank you very much. So now we're moving on to item 10.3 on our agenda, committee members. It is the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Advisory Committee Accessible Captioning Timeline. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Jackson. Seconded by Councillor Marula. Any questions about the report? Any discussion on the report? And so I have just one question, and I just make it real quick so I don't have to relinquish the chair. Is there a timeline to the captioning? Do we know where we are in that regard, Madam Clerk?
Snezana is here from IT, who can probably better answer that question.
Thank you. Susanna, are you there?
Yes, I am. Would you mind please repeating the question? Sorry.
Thank you. The recommendation is to create captioning so that the audibly challenged can actually see what's going on and read what's going on. And is there a timeline to moving forward with that?
On that matter, I'm meeting with the subject matter expert next week to look into that functionality of the applications, whether that's within WebEx application or eScribe. So I'll have more details on it probably next week, and I'll update the information to Janet Pillon if that's okay.
Thank you. Now, there are recommendations in the report, Madam Clerk. So are we receiving the report or are we approving the recommendations? I think the intention of council was to have the captioning, but the question is timing.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you. So we have purchased a third encoder, which is the purpose of the third encoder is to enable captioning, and IT is working on establishing that right now and putting that together. I'm not sure what the timeline is on that, but I know it's underway. As for the report that we have on hand right now, it is certainly up to the will of the committee to approve the recommendation in the report or to receive the report as they wish.
Okay, so the recommendation in the report is that accessible captioning is available on all advisory committee meetings through WebEx by May 30th, 2022. What is the will of the committee? Do you wish to receive this report and wait for IT to come back with when they're going to do it across all platforms?
Chairman Clark, thank you.
So that's to receive the report and await further update from IT on implementing captioning across all of our platforms. And I need a seconder for that. Councillor Marula, are you good for that? Yep, thank you very much, sir. Any further questions or comments on it? Okay, we'll go straight to the vote, Madam Clerk, please. Thank you. And that vote carried, sorry, 4-0. I was trying to get back to my roadmap. Okay, we're now moving on to item 13.1, which is amendments to the outstanding business list. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Any discussion or questions on the OBL? Seeing none, we'll have the vote, please. And I bypassed notices of motion, but I wasn't aware of any notices of motion. So if I missed anything, councillors, please bring it up. And that item carries. And seeing no hands is frantically waving at me, we'll need a mover and a seconder to adjourn the meeting. Moved by Councillor Jackson and seconded by Councillor Marula. And we'll have that vote, please, before you go. And thank you so much for your cooperation again today. You make my job so easy. Yep, she's still there, but And that carried 4-0. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Take care.